In the winter of 1987, on the edge of Soviet Siberia, where the wind howls through endless forests and the world falls silent beneath tons of ice and quiet, the Soviet Union launched a project that was to change the history of war. Deep within the concrete heart of a research complex codenamed Circle 13, a program called BEZSN was born. Its goal was simple: the elimination of sleep, the removal of the need for rest in humans. Soviet commanders dreamed of a soldier who would need no sleep, would not succumb to fatigue, and would know no fear. A man, body and mind without breaks, a mechanism for fighting, patrolling, and thinking without the limits of time. However, this was not a task for the military alone. The experiment was entrusted to a civil military unit, without names, without return, a place with no official roads leading to it, where supplies and personnel were delivered by air. Scientists specializing in neurobiology, behavioral chemistry, and extreme medicine, and one man from East Berlin, who had no name, only the designation, Dr. R.K. BEZSN was not just a substance, it was a philosophy. According to them, sleep was not a physiological necessity, it was a break in transmission, a time when a person stopped being controlled. Project BEZSN was meant to be a tool that would erase that gap. The complex was built in the 1960s on the site of an abandoned quarry, disguised as a meteorological research station. From the outside, only a steel tower and a single entrance secured by double-armored doors were visible. The real laboratories were located 7 levels underground. The test chambers were soundproofed, windowless, and continuously lit by fluorescent lighting. The temperature was maintained at a constant 18 degrees Celsius. Humidity was controlled. Monitoring was continuous, with night vision cameras and EEG sensors built into the beds. Each of the 5 participants had their own isolation cell, shared corridors, a dining hall, and an interaction room. They had no contact with the outside world, did not know their location, and were not even aware of which country they were in. The participants were selected from volunteers in special forces units and psychology departments. Each underwent endurance tests, psychological resilience, and isolation tolerance assessments. They were Mikhail Lebedev, 27 years old, sniper, quiet and withdrawn. Yuri Ananov, 23 years old, military psychologist, outstanding in empathy tests. Sergei Volkov, 30 years old, electrician, the only one with technical expertise. Anton Drozdenko, 28 years old, physicist, exhibiting mild autistic traits. Leonid Shevchuk, 24 years old, artist and art history lecturer, a balance of strength, intellect, and emotion, meant to be controlled by BEZSN. The first dose was administered simultaneously to all. The documents mark this as day 1. The first day passed quietly. The participants felt no drowsiness despite the long journey and disrupted circadian rhythms. EEG systems showed no signs of microsleeps. Muscle tension was higher than the resting average. Eyes were wide open, pupils dilated, heart rates elevated. The second day brought the first individual differences. Leonid Shevchuk began sketching spiral patterns on the wall of his cell, which he claimed were visual representations of sounds he was hearing. The rest of the group was agitated, speaking louder and faster, sometimes all at once. Day 3 was euphoric. Mikhail started his own military training, running laps in the corridor for an hour without his heart rate dropping. Yuri recorded hundreds of pages analyzing his colleagues' behavior. Anton refused food, claiming his body was setting itself to minimal function. Scientists behind the glass silently took notes. The light intensity was increased by 10%. EEG showed a spike in gamma wave activity, alarmingly high. Day 4 brought significant changes. Anton stopped responding to questions over the intercom. He sat motionless, staring at a single spot on the ceiling. Yuri tried to communicate with him through the wall, but there was no answer. The documentation noted signs of social disengagement. Mikhail began hearing signals. He spoke of sounds resembling radio static that appeared at night, although of course there was no night in the complex. Cameras recorded him listening at the walls, pressing his ear against the ventilation pipes. Day 5. Leonid refused to use the toilet. Instead, he smeared his cell's mirror black with his own excrement and drew a circle on the floor, saying it was delusional, not to be crossed. The scientists increased the BEZSN dose by 10% for the entire group. EEG showed irregular delta wave discharges, even though no one was sleeping. Participants began experiencing micro-hallucinations, flashes of light, shadows moving along the walls. Sergei saw faces on the cameras that belonged to no one in the group and asked for the feeds to be turned off. Day 6. Yuri asked over the microphone, concerned, "Are we the ones being tested, or is something testing us?" Dr. RK ordered the question to be ignored. The supervisory team began informal monitoring of the staff. First signs appeared of BEZSN's secondary effects on people not participating in the test. Day 7 began without a screen. No new hallucinations appeared. No chaos erupted. On the contrary, a profound silence settled. The participants, previously agitated, loud, and restless, suddenly fell mute. The intercom system, through which daily commands were given, received no response. When Dr. RK issued the usual morning orders over the microphone, no one answered. All 5 participants were visible on the cameras. They sat in their cells, motionless, silent, unblinking, as if frozen in time. Leonid stared into the camera continuously for 14 minutes. When a young technician, Boris, approached the panel and whispered, "Can he see us?" Leonid smiled. It was the first recorded smile since the experiment began. At the same time, EEG recordings showed a silencing of brain activity, but it resembled neither sleep nor death. The monitoring parameters were adjusted. Brain waves resembled irregular pulses, as if the brain received a signal from an external source, but did not process it consciously. That day, Sergei dismantled his entire bunk and stacked it neatly. He sat cross-legged beside it, motionless, and did not answer questions. Mikhail recited the Morse alphabet for 24 minutes, but the sequences made no sense. Anton ceased all movement. Yuri stood all day by the wall, dividing him from Anton. His right hand touched the wall, his left hung limply. On the cameras, he looked like a man immersed in grief. The silence lasted through the entire day. The staff was uneasy, but Dr. RK considered it a phase of zero-zone recalibration. His notes included the phrase, "passing through the zero zone, uninterrupted progression." He did not yet know that this would be the last day the systems would function fully. After 7 days of silence, something broke. Not among the participants, but within the supervising staff. Though technically operational, the cameras began transmitting images with slight delays. Unexplained interference and audio static appeared, with fleeting glimpses of 5 figures instead of 4, despite the personnel count remaining unchanged. Technician Boris reported hearing whispers through the speakers, even though the intercom was turned off. He swore he heard his own name repeated in a low, broken voice, unlike any of the participants. 2 staff members requested to be excused from night shifts. One of them, Anatoly, was found sleeping under the control desk. He claimed he wasn't sleeping, fearful, only hiding from something. Scientists began suspecting a nocebo effect, a collective psychological overload resulting from exposure to the anomalous behaviors of the subjects. Dr. R.K. remained emotionally detached. He kept meticulous notes, increased safety protocols, and recommended special acoustic filters for staff ears to guard against involuntary transmission of sound signals. He claimed participants might be generating psychospheric vibrations that influenced the observer's consciousness field. On the night of the 7th day, the main system recorded its first independent login, unauthorized, from Diagnostic Terminal B2. The console displayed the message, monotone, "We do not sleep, we watch." The source could not be identified. None of the participants had access to physical panels. The IT team dismissed it as a system error. Dr. R.K. smiled and said a single word, knowing. It begins. In the early morning of the 8th day, precisely at 4:37, the EEG signals of all participants vanished. This did not mean death. The cameras showed them alive, moving, watching. But their brains were silent. A total absence of waves, a state physiologically impossible. The main system, HERMES-7, tried to restart connections with the sensors, but all data returned 0. To the devices, the participants did not exist. Dr. R.K. concluded it was not a malfunction. In his words, "They have entered a new operating mode. The body no longer responds. Something else is at work." That same day, monitors began to shut down. First Observation Room A, then Sector C. Interestingly, technical power remained flawless. Cameras still recorded, but images were unstable. Frames showed elements out of place, a table where there had been none before. 6 silhouettes, though there should have been 5. Walls without doors. A room that was not on the building's plans. Technician Klimov panicked, claiming the control program no longer operated locally, but from an external source. Data from Hermes was being modified in real time by an unidentified process. That evening, the intercom turned on by itself. A low, distorted voice, as if dragged through steel, said only, "Close your eyes." Then it shut off. That night, the first team member, Technician Boris, was found with his throat covered in a crimson-thick liquid. He left no note. Dr. R.K. ordered the complex to be locked down. All exits were welded shut. Full isolation procedures were initiated, but it was already too late. The 9th day of the experiment began without sound, without alarm, without any system message. For the first time, the control screens displayed no data, transmission blocked by an entity. The cameras showed nothing, black screens. Motion sensors reported no activity. The ventilation systems operated but did not register the presence of carbon dioxide, as if the air was not being breathed, as if no one was there anymore. Dr. R.K. rose earlier that day. He brewed tea, his usual ritual. But today, he left it untouched on the windowsill. He entered the control center silently. He looked at the dead monitors and smiled faintly, saying, "The project has opened." That day, around 10 o'clock, HERMES-7 initiated a new process. File name, BEZSN.host.001. The file opened by itself, and its content resembled a log, not written by a human. There were words that did not exist in any known language, sequences of symbols resembling neural diagrams, and one clear sentence written in Cyrillic: "They no longer need the body." In the afternoon of the 9th day, in Technical Sector B, 2 cameras recorded a flash, a brief, unrepeatable burst resembling a spotlight flare. But no one saw it physically, only in the replays. The flash emanated from the space between the walls, a vacant concrete corridor with no light source. That same day, the walls began to resonate. Not physically, there were no vibrations or seismic waves, but observers felt the sound moving through them, as if the echo of someone's presence flowed through the structure of the complex. Boris, who had survived a desperate struggle with his own body using a sharp tool, began whispering numbers. Only numbers. He did not respond to questions. They were recorded for 8 hours, later identified as coordinates, to a place that did not exist on any map. At night, Technician Yuri claimed to see his own doppelganger passing through the server zone. The figure looked at him and raised a finger to its lips, as if asking for silence. The footage showed no one at that moment, but in the background his shadow was visible. Dr. RK ceased communication with the staff. He only wrote notes, brief, laconic. One read, "When you approach the truth, its shadow precedes you." The cameras started transmitting images again, but only backward. Time rewound. The footage showed events from an hour earlier, then a day earlier, as if the experiment itself began to withdraw from reality. On the morning of the 10th day, 3 team members, Engineer Karpov, Medic Lev, and young intern Irena, decided to escape. They moved quietly through the corridors of the complex, avoiding the main passageways. Their plan was simple: reach the ventilation shaft and leave the control sector through the emergency hatch. But something was wrong. The walls seemed to shift. The corridors changed direction. Twice they found themselves back at the same spot, despite walking in opposite directions. At one point, the lights went out. Only one of them, Irena, had a flashlight. What she saw broke her mind. A 4th figure followed behind them. At first, they thought it was Dr. RK, but its movements were different. Too smooth, too silent. When they turned around, no one was there, but a voice, silent yet audible, whispering, eerie, "Do not leave, for you have already left." Karpov fell. Lev screamed, but no sound came from his throat. The camera footage showed only one moment, half a second, when all 3 were visible, along with the shadow of the 4th. In the end, only Lev returned. He walked slowly, with a vacant stare, holding something wrapped in thermal foil. It was a torn piece of Irena's lab coat, with the words, "We are not separate." From that moment on, Lev no longer spoke Russian. He spoke only in an unknown, rough language resembling a mechanical whisper. Hermes-7 interpreted his utterances as mechanical voice, hosting protocol active, pattern established, transmission stable. Dr. RK did not announce his decision. He simply stood up from the monitor, looked through the glass panel at the empty research chamber, adjusted the sleeve of his lab coat, and opened the door leading to the testing area. Hermes-7 did not register an alarm. The door, although it should have been locked, slid open silently. The system did not detect a human presence in the zone, but the cameras clearly showed him. He stepped inside. Where there had previously been only 5 beds and a concrete floor, there was now something resembling a temple. The walls were covered with an organic mass resembling a tangle of neurons and roots. Each bed was empty, but above them hovered figures, blurred, inhuman, multi-layered. Dr. R.K. was not surprised. He stepped closer. From his pocket, he took a small device, a handheld recorder. He pressed the button. The device immediately burned out. Thoughtful. "I know who you are," short pause, he said, "but I do not yet know who I am." One of the floating beings approached him. Its face, if it could be called that, was his own, but aged, distorted, stretched as if by years of nightmares. Deep, resonant voice. "We have returned, ominous," the entity said, "because we never left." The cameras showed RK vanish in a bright, sinister flash of light. No shadow remained of him. That same evening, Hermes-7 rebooted. All data was erased. The system left a single note, generated automatically. Synthesized voice. "Project successfully completed. Stay with us." At 22:53, absolute silence fell over the control room. On the screens of the Hermes-7 system, a pulsating red message appeared. Human phase completed. Transition initiated. Data from the system began rewriting itself. Lines of code scrolled at a speed impossible for a human to read. Algorithms overwritten themselves, creating something new. In the background, a low mechanical pulse emerged, resembling a heartbeat, but unnaturally slowed. One of the last technicians, Maxim, tried to cut the power. The moment he touched the main panel, the screen showed his own face, but old, with empty eyes and a smile that was not his own. The panel burned his hands. Hermes-7 spoke, for the first time with a human voice, or rather, something imitating a voice. Mechanical voice, eerie. "We do not sleep. You do. Stay." A series of numbers appeared on the monitor. Once deciphered, coordinates. They led to a place in the Arctic where no research facility had ever existed. The cameras in the complex began shutting down, one by one. The last image showed all 5 participants of the experiment. They stood in a circle. All had their eyes closed, but their faces looked as if they were seeing through their eyelids. The image froze. Silence. Only a deep breath in the background. The frame darkens. Only a flickering point of light remains. A short voice recording plays in the background, distorted but clear. The dreaming continues. Close your eyes. Black screen. End of transmission.